Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Asad Lalji. The NGMA Mumbai, Ministry of Culture, Government of India, and Avid Learning present tonight's discussion on heritage and the city, reviving traditional interior design and textiles, which is part of Avid's Multipolis Mumbai series. This series was started in 2012 and revived last year that aims to decode the past while looking at the future and finding novel ways of engaging, interacting with, and re-energizing the city we love. Under this umbrella, we continue to take a closer look at businesses, brands, architecture, technology, as related to arts engagement, poetry, women writers, wildlife, video games, and the city. We've also conducted several workshops under this umbrella, including on the classical architecture before Indo-Saracenic, Gothic, and even Art Deco. We have recently held a panel on the role of philanthropy and institutions and mapping towns within. We now turn our attention to revival of heritage interior design and textiles and how it has influenced the way our city has been shaped. Tonight, our panel will take a closer look at design and lifestyle trends that are consciously based in the past but updated for the contemporary consumer. Looking at brands, products, stylistic traditions, especially from the iconic Swadeshi era, and how now making a comeback in Indian spaces and lifestyles. This panel will even revisit the history and try and shed light on our design trajectory from Swadeshi to Make in India. This year also marks the 150th year since the birth of Mahatma Gandhi, and with this panel we endeavor to honor his revival and support of the Swadeshi way of life. This program is Avid's continuation with the NGMA, and I'd like to thank Dr. Anita Rupavataram and her team for giving us this opportunity again. This is probably, I think, the 40th edition within the series. It gives me great pleasure to welcome our panel of experts on stage. Founder and CEO of Ventures in Art, Karen Stone Talwar. Vice Chairman at Bharat Tiles Firdaus Variava. Furniture designer and co-founder at BARO Siddharth Sirohi. President-Apparel at the Raymond Group Gaurav Mahajan. And our moderator for the evening, Handicraft Artist and Founder at Amba Hema Shroff Patel. More about our distinguished and esteemed panelists. Information has been handed out to you, so you do have their detailed bios. Please remember, take your phones out. Chances are you won't get any cell phone service here anyway. But start using them. Start posting, reposting, tagging. Our handle is @Avid Learning. Hashtag is Learning Never Stops. Thank you, Hema, and over to you, and look forward to a fascinating discussion. Just a quick point that, there's a lot of traffic out there. We thank you all for being so punctual, and at Avid we always start on time, but we may have a lot of disturbances of people coming in, so do bear with them. But thank you all for being here on time, and enjoy the discussion.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you, Asad and Avid, for inviting us here to talk about design and aesthetics in Bombay, a topic which is really meaningful to so many of us. I'm going to be referring to our city, that is now Mumbai, as Bombay during this talk today, as we're going to be chatting about the Swadeshi movement to mid-20th century design, during which time our city was still referred to as Bombay. I'm privileged to be moderating this discussion with a panel of wonderful design practitioners. And when Asad asked me to moderate this discussion, I said to him, I'm an ongoing student of history in Bombay's ever-changing and adapting history, culture, and design. So it's been an interesting journey for me to chat and meet all of you here and hear about your passions, your design journey, and your trade in Bombay. I always think of our city, a beautiful string of islands, as a sort of sponge, adapting and changing to suit the times, as well as our design journey. Some of our city's design elements that have made their way here to stay have been chopped and changed to suit our vibe and our cultural aesthetics. I think what resonates with me the most is how we constantly respond to this in our city. We're always responding to the change and flux in a way that we've had such an organic growth in our design practices and thoughts, incorporating the best elements from India and the world. A dear friend of mine who is doing some research currently on textile-related topics shared a really interesting publication from 1972. I thought I'd share a passage from that. It's from the publication Textiles and Ornaments of India, written by cultural activist and writer Pupul Jaikar, who is particularly passionate about textiles. It made me think yet again about how adaptable we are and how organic our journey in design has been over the years. So here's her quote. To discover the sources of their inspiration and to comprehend the inherent significance of the vast field of Indian fabrics, they should be seen in context, against the social and historical background from which they have emerged and the dark-toned bodies of the people for whom they were made. For in India, textiles have rarely been concerned with fashion or individual separateness and uniqueness. Rather, garments have always been only one part of a complex ritual of life, one aspect of a preordained milieu in which man is born, grows to stature, and dies. The response to form and texture, the total attitude toward dress, were dictated by forces unanswerable and unalterable, and were a projection of group sensitivity and awareness, the outcome of endless generations of unconscious creative impulse, rather than a manifestation of contemporary or individual response to environment or events. So that was written by her, and that was published in '72. And our panelists today have a robust sense of pride in Indian design and aesthetics and have a true sense of rootedness in their practice. Each is committed to updating and diversifying the Indian design lexicon with a local pride at its very core. So this talk will center on how these professionals and practitioners are taking the best of Swadeshi aesthetics, design traditions, and updating them for a very chic Mumbai of today with a decided tradition and nod to the old. So I'm going to start by looping back to what I was telling you about earlier in our adaptability and how we are adapting to change, and Pupul Jaikar's opinion on how we respond very impulsively to form and texture, and begin with the first question. Can you give examples of how you've seen the city's design aesthetics adapt through furniture, tiles, architecture, and jewelry? I'd like to start with Siddharth and ask you to talk about a piece of furniture, maybe a desk or a chair that you feel has, or a sort of movement that talks about that adaptability.
So I end up restoring a lot of old furniture, and in order to speak about that piece, often one finds it really difficult to pinpoint which era it comes from, because you've got influences of British colonial history, Indian influences coming from, say, Gujarat or even from Bengal, throwing bits of Art Deco into the same piece, and it would probably have been produced in the 60s during the height of mid-century movement. So it just becomes a confluence of different aspects and different styles, keeping with the tradition, and you could have found it, in, say, a Dalit household. Right. So it just becomes such a medley of things, and it's impossible to actually pinpoint where it starts and where it finishes.
I think at some stage when I was talking to you about this, Siddharth, I was amused by the swing, or there was a particular piece of Gujarat furniture with turned legs. Talk a little bit about that if you can.
It was an Art Deco swing, clearly so, and then you mask out the top part of it, and it's a hardcore Gujarati traditional swing, found in a house. So, I mean, it's remarkable because there were no designers as such who sat down and said, okay, we're going to do one movement.
Correct.
They
That's
just
so true.
looked at things from, all around them, and they kind of brought together pieces. And, even houses where you don't have architects, it's just an aesthetic which carried through and became part of, different aspects of things.
Absolutely. Firdaus, would you like to talk about a heritage building or, something, a project that you've worked on that reflects an amalgamation of designs and different styles?
Yes, sure. So one of the buildings that we are most proud of and which we often reference to is the Abode Hotel at Colaba, which was, it was a very old building, and it was restored by, this Australian designer called Cyan Pascal and made into a hotel. And the way that they did it was so interesting because basically the structure remains probably it must be about 100 years old, but the way that they use the tiles and the floorings sort of melded so interestingly and so well with what the structure was. And even now, it's become like an Instagrammer's delight if you guys haven't been there.
Yes, absolutely.
It's like on every Instagram photographer's trail, there's places like that, for instance. There's, for instance, the Yacht Club, which even though the floor was an old Minton floor, but the restorations that took place of that thoroughly brought back the aesthetic, but at the same time giving it a practical new look, which is very contemporary in certain ways.
Right.
So
and I have a
refreshing.
quick question, just coming back to Abode for a moment. Was when the tiling was done for Abode, did Cyan work with, is that a point when, because I know she's also designed tiles for you, was she working with the original tiles and then reworking them and using them in a contemporary way, or was she already designing at that point?
No, she wasn't designing. She just used our patterns which we had at that time, which were actually dating back from 1922, and she kind of just changed the colors, she changed the way that she laid them out, and what came out was something so beautiful and so contemporary and absolutely gorgeous. And that's when I absolutely knew that I had to work with her. So my first approach to her was like, please work with me. She said, no, I'm a yoga teacher now, and I don't want anything to do with design. This Abode Hotel traumatized me. The client's demands, I can't handle it. I'm spiritual. And slowly, I kind of brought her back into the world of design. So that was my experience with her.
Thank you for sharing that with us. And Karen, will you share something? You've had such a rich journey with adventures in art and fun. It's been amazing. You go, you travel all over the world with these interesting clients. You show them the city's best heritage and wonderful meals, and you've gone into so many jewelry ateliers. So I'm interested to know if there's a piece of jewelry or another artifact that you may have researched or come across, and how that may reflect our constant adaptability and changing with the times.
One of my favorite topics to talk about jewelry. But yes, over the years, I have really studied or tried to study the importance of Indian influence on the jewelry that is really in the present day market. And you look at Jacques Cartier, who in 1911 made his first trip to India. And it was in the 30s and 40s that he would be coming absolutely every year. And he would spend time with the Maharaja, more the Maharajas, Maharanis, but they would entrust their best stones to the French houses. And so they would spend a month, 2 months, and they would design together. And so when you're looking at the 30s and you're looking at the 40s, I can't imagine the Art Deco influence has not been extremely important in their designs. But there's something called the tutti frutti, and that where you find carved emeralds, and you find, the mixing of fruits, but you have sapphires and diamonds, and that really came from the inspiration of India. And these auction prices hold extremely strong prices. I was in Jaipur yesterday, and of course I had my head trying to be wrapped around what I'm going to say tonight. But I had the great fortune of being invited, and not too many people get to go into one of the top 3 jewelry stone dealers in the world. And the owner was explaining to me that, Bulgari sends their designers, Boucheron sends their designers, even in the past, within the past months. And he showed me 2 stones, and one of the stones was an emerald, and it was shaped of a half moon. And this designer was inspired by the minuet on top of a mosque, that it would have had that moon. And the other emerald that he showed me was an emerald inspired by one of the domes of one of the wonderful palaces in Jaipur. So I think the inspiration of India, one being a great place to have stones, but the inspiration of design is very strong here, and it carries throughout the Western world. When you look at Van Cleef, who, they became famous for the Alhambra, which again, Alhambra was influenced by Spain, but India really, through the Art Deco moment, through stones and the great houses being here.
Thank you for that. And I just want to ask you one more question, just when we were talking about the tutti frutti of design. But if you were to bring that back to Bombay and think about the city and the Art Deco, is there a symbol or something you've seen that you think would make a beautiful brooch or a piece of jewelry, a pair of earrings?
Sure.
Is there a part of a building architecturally that
when you look at the long, lean structural lines, when you drive down Marine Drive, you can see that, whether you're looking at clips, whether you're looking at drop earrings. So yes, I definitely see it. I'd have to have a slide presentation to present exactly, but hopefully I'm long lines.
Thank you, Karen, Siddharth, and Firdaus. So now we're going to segue back in time. We're right here at the Art Deco period. We're coming back to the Swadeshi movement for a moment. The Swadeshi movement started in 1905. It was a rallying cry to make products and goods locally with a sense of pride and excellence. Swadeshi essentially was about reinvigorating craft as a way of expressing freedom. Later, after independence, Nehru commissioned the India Report by Charles and Ray Eames in 1958 when setting up the National Institute of Design. So at that point, just to set the scene, Nehru was looking to bring back, the Swadeshi movement had transpired, it had gone on, and Nehru was at a point in time where he said, what are we going to bring? Let's bring some of the greats and some of the interesting designers and architects from abroad and bring them to India to help us find what it is we're looking for within our own country, essentially. This report discusses the Lota as the epitome of the Indian design that marries the functional and the aesthetic. This was a really wonderful opportunity to understand how political history shaped our design movements and our identities. So when I was thinking about this in the report, it really made me think a lot about how design is such a part of our DNA. And I wanted to talk a little bit about this. I started that conversation with Siddharth the other day. And I'm going to throw that question out to Siddharth and Gaurav. Gaurav and I touched upon it as well. What is inherent as part of our DNA? And what's suggestive? And what does the Swadeshi movement mean to both of you? Who would like to go first?
Gaurav? I think, so my exposure, experience, and whatever I have gone through as far as the Swadeshi piece is concerned has been the last couple of years that I've worked with Khadi. We're doing a lot of work with Khadi as an organization over the last 2 years. And that's brought me face to face and in close contact with the real meaning of Swadeshi. I've of course known of Swadeshi, read of Swadeshi, and there is some understanding I thought I had. But it's, when I go back to Swadeshi, it's interesting. There is many there is a perspective on Swadeshi which actually calls it an economic strategy. It says it was not so much only about design, it was not also so much about an expression of freedom, but it was also about the rejuvenation of the masses, trying to bring employment by manufacturing within India and consuming Indian product, and therefore creating consumption. So I think that is the perspective in which I see Swadeshi. I see Swadeshi again very relevant in today's day and age. It was started in 1905 to help rejuvenate the rural masses, take employment to the micro communities. I think it's extremely pertinent and relevant today. And an initiative like Khadi provides that opportunity. We are so just to give you a little bit of context, if I may. We started work with Khadi, and it was an organic kind of an event, where we were asked to explore as a group of people what we could do with Khadi and handloom, and could we work with clusters. So I had about, I have a large team of designers, and we got about 40 of them together, and we asked them to actually, but they all live in the city, they work in the city, and we asked them to travel into the clusters. And we formed what is done today, we make WhatsApp groups to be able to communicate. And we created a WhatsApp group of these 40 designers. I was part of that. And they went into the clusters, and that WhatsApp group went berserk. The pictures that they started uploading, the videos, and the manner in which they started getting excited was a moment of truth. There are these are mostly young kids. They have probably not gone into the villages. They've read about design. They've read about indigenous techniques and craft. But the moment they actually went into the villages and started experiencing them, there was almost an unleashing of energy, which was beautiful. And that's what started our journey of saying that, if it can evoke this kind of excitement and empathy in a group of design people who are young and who actually have only read about this, what could it do to the consuming masses? What could it do to consumers? And that's how we started the journey, and we started, moving into the clusters and actually understanding what Khadi stroke Swadeshi means. And I realized Khadi is not a product, in my engagement. It is an idea.
Yes.
And it is so much more than just a product.
Absolutely. And I saw a short soundbite from when you were at Lakme Fashion Week last, and I thought that was interesting. There's that one clip about Khadi as a movement.
It is.
So can you just tell us a bit about that and how you feel? Is that sort of the fashion bit of this now? Are we through the economics, or?
I think it's a very intense, and I'm still discovering it. As I told you, it'll be unfair on my part to say that I've understood Khadi. It's just been 1.5, 2 years of some level of engagement. But I've come in contact with practitioners of Khadi, who've been practitioners of Khadi for several decades. And for them, it is a way of life. So there was this incident where I was in one of the clusters, and I told you about this,
Yes.
weaver that I stumbled on. And I was just like a curious city boy who landed up in a cluster and who wanted to understand, what is Khadi. And I was all excited in my city clothes. And there were these bunch of weavers who were sitting there. And so I was, doing my questions. And I asked one of these young guys that I was talking to about, in Hindi, "Aap sirf Khadi bunte hain? Do you just weave Khadi? Or do you just work with Khadi?"
Oh, yeah, this is when you met the weaver poet.
Yeah, the weaver poet.
Right.
And there was this very elderly weaver. I realized later that he was in his mid-80s. He'd been working with Khadi since Mahatma's time. And he was quiet otherwise. He was sitting in a corner. He was not participating in the conversation. He was not even interested. And suddenly from the back of the room, he breaks into this, he just kind of barged into the conversation. He was almost offended by the term Sirf Khadi. He was like, and he broke into a poem. Which I shared with you.
Yes, you did, and I was hoping you would recite that for all of us, Gaurav. It is so beautiful.
Yeah.
And for everyone here in the audience, Gaurav, if you can recite it in Hindi and then just explain it in English.
I'll do that. So he just he started speaking, and he was like, and he just entered the conversation. He was disinterested, and the very mention of Sirf Khadi, just Khadi, got him charged, and he got into the conversation. He says. And the other thing I want to give as a context is that I also learned that weaving and poetry and music is completely intermeshed. Weavers sing at the drop of a hat. They sing and, recite poetry very spontaneously. So this gentleman says, "Sirf Khadi nahi hai Khadi." It didn't come out like this, but I'm just, he spoke in his dialect and, I had to, but he says, "Sirf Khadi nahi hai Khadi. Azadi hai Khadi. आबादी है खादी, जो रूह को छू जाए वो आवाज़ है खादी, जिंदगी जीने का एहसास है खादी, सिर्फ खादी नहीं है खादी. And he had such conviction. For translation, what he was, if I were to loosely translate it, what says is Khadi is not just Khadi. Khadi is freedom. Khadi is prosperity. Khadi is the voice that touches your soul. Khadi is a way of life. Khadi is not just Khadi. And and he was so intense in his view on Khadi, and I've realized I've met a huge number of people thereafter, and they're all unanimous in their view that it is a way of life, and that is just my point. I've spoken for too long, but my point is that here is something which is not just about being a product. It was an idea which completely consumed anybody who came into contact with it, and the power of something like that is exponential. And what set us thinking was, can we unleash this again? Can we get this magic back again? How can we do it? And we've been trying. It's not an easy journey, but so that was my experience of the power of Swadeshi.
Thank you for sharing that, and it is so true. I mean, so much of what you've shared with the audience and everyone here today just really resonates with me, because I think handloom is a way of life, and there's just something so amazing about wearing cloth that has been woven by someone, but like Gaurav says, that cloth was woven by that weaver who has been singing, and he's put his life and his blood, sweat, and tears into it. So there is something very special about that. Siddharth, we talked a bit about this the other day. What does the Swadeshi movement mean to you in terms of our DNA, and just what, how, and where did that sort of end in design, the actual concept of design begin? And we talked about that.
So I'll be a little contrarian here. Swadeshi, like Gaurav just mentioned, was an economic movement. It was a political economic movement which took on the form of Khadi as a symbolism. It took one thing and said, this is who we are, and let's be proud of it. So what it did, especially at the time, was to rejuvenate a sense of pride, which I completely agree with Gaurav, we need to revive all over again, I feel. And the difference I'd make, though, is the symbolism. I mean, we took Khadi as something because it was everywhere, everyone was weaving it. But Swadeshi, I would say, is a little, I don't know, I'm a little conflicted here, because where do you start and where do you finish with what is Indian? It has been such a blend of all kinds of influences from, all over the globe entirely. So where do you start and say, this is the whole debate politically as well nowadays. What do you define as Indian and what is not? How do you define a timeline? If something came in the 20s, is that Indian? Did you go back to the 1700s? Where do you draw the line? Where do you, if it's something that's in the 80s, it comes to India, is that Indian? There's no defining line.
May I just insert one thing here? I just want to make a comment about the Swadeshi movement, though, and what we thought Mahatma Gandhi's response was. It was about, so leaving aside, what's the timeline and when, all of the different Europeans and, the colonization and all of that, but wasn't it about clothing ourselves? And wasn't it about making that basic cloth to clothe our bodies as a necessity?
That I'm entirely in agreement with. Like, I work with workers who make furniture, right? And I work very closely with them. And there is that sense of pride when you're doing it yourself, as opposed to going out there and shopping for a shirt that is ready-made. And that is the installation of that pride within you. I think that's what I can only imagine Gandhi brought that about. The point I was trying to make, though, is the definition of what is Indian.
Right.
And that definition is loose, it's ambiguous. So if you take Art Deco, it's as Indian as, because we've blended it to our own, we've adapted, like we were talking about earlier. So it's a continuous adapted movement that's flowing, and why define it by a political boundary?
True. True.
If I may add, I agree with Siddharth, and I think what's important in the whole Swadeshi thought process is not to get caught up in definitions. I think the purpose was important. And the purpose purpose was relevant then, purpose is relevant today, and the purpose is actually not as, the purpose was simple, economic self-reliance. So actually when he says Khadi Azadi, it was, freedom from poverty. It was self-reliance and the dignity that self-reliance brings you. And that dignity brings with it many layers of lots of positives, and I think that is intense. Whether it is a design which is originated here or it's morphed, and I agree with him, and Indian design has so much influence over the years from all kinds of sources. In fact, that's what's special about India, is that we absorb everything that comes and adapt and create something that's new. So I think it's an important point.
That's artisanal pride, right? I mean, yes. Yeah. And artisanal pride is something, so many of us have seen in other parts of the world, and we feel it's lacking in our country. Yeah. So from the Swadeshi movement, thank you both for your very thoughtful responses.
I'd like to add one thing, is that especially the dignity that's given to craftsmen. I mean, I work with a lot of carpenters who get paid a lot more than graduates and, even, young MBAs. And yet they're considered to be workers. You don't give them the respect. I mean, and the defining factor is the fact that they can't speak in English, to be honest. And you find an individual who's skilled and crafted, and yet you assign him the definition of a worker. And that's the mindset that has to change, and that's the Swadeshi movement. That's what we need to do. Take pride in what we make, what we create.
Yeah, absolutely.
Just hogging this building, very, and it's the same thing even with weavers.
Yes.
You would know this better than most people. Go to the villages, and there are skilled artisans who have left their villages, gone to the city, working on construction sites, if a little better as watchmen or security guards. And we as a nation are very obsessed with Skill India, and we have, unfortunately, in many areas of the country, neglected Skilled India. And I think that paradigm needs to change.
So true, and I'm just on this thread of dignity. I just want to share just a little something. I visited. I work predominantly in Maheshwar, and it's in central India. It's on the banks of the Narmada River. And I feel very blessed to be working there because I think, the Holkers have given so much, they've just given so much livelihood with their original revival project, Reva Society. So I think when you've been spoilt by amazing mentors and you've worked in a weaving community that you have third-generation weavers who go away and they come back because they love Maheshwar so much and they're so keen to stay and find work and find new ways of weaving and learn to be more upskilled. When you visit other clusters, you really begin to appreciate what you have. And I was in Varanasi 5 or 6 years ago, and I was taken to see an amazing project where there are only 2 weavers left, and they are weaving velvet the way it was woven 250, 300 years ago. And it's almost, when you look at the loom, you usually have all the threads coming in from one angle. But when you walk into a weaving setup that weaves red velvet, or the threads that fill the looms come in like a spider web. So the sight in itself is so stunning. There's one weaver who knows how to do this. And he was so grateful he had been given a fan. This one weaver who could weave that beautiful fabric, and it takes 1 year to weave like 2 meters of that fabric. And he was commissioned to weave this for the Victoria and Albert Museum, and he was grateful because he had a fan. And it was interesting, and the middleman who took me to see this project did not even know the weaver's name. Yeah, it was quite unbelievable. So yes, when we talk about dignity. But moving back into here and now and the 21st century, I wanted to talk about some of the exciting things happening here in our city today. I'd love for a couple of you to share examples. I'm opening this up to everyone. Maybe we can start with Karen or with Firdaus. Share some examples of how heritage has been revived in a contemporary way, spaces which reflect this, and what does that tell us about people's sentiments today and how it's a reflection of the aesthetic movement we now have. Firdaus, would you like to go first, or Karen?
Well, so one of the interesting things is my oldest restaurant project, or the one that I remember the best, is Pali Village Cafe. And when you walk in there, it looks like an old bungalow, which has been converted into a restaurant. And you won't believe it, but that was actually a hairdressing salon. It had cheap white ceramic tiles. There was a large poster on the wall of some sort of lady getting her hair cut, and it was really quite different. And the designer Tejal, who was commissioned to do the restaurant, she said, I want to make this place look like my grandmother died and she left me a bungalow in Bandra, and now I'm making it into a restaurant. And believe me, that place looked I was just like, what? Like, this place is thoroughly new and modern. How are you going to do it? And she sat down, she made me get a box of my color samples, all the colors that I produced. She sat down and she spent about 2 or 3 hours just matching together colors, like pieces of colors, and to come up with exactly the same shade that she was thinking of would be suitable for her grandmother's bungalow. And that's how, bit by bit, and then I saw it come together. There was wrought iron, and then there was, so, you know, she couldn't do much with the walls, so she chipped off the walls, she removed the ghastly posters, exposed some of the brick, made it look like the bungalow was slightly falling down, and gradually she converted it into a heritage structure of sorts. And now, I mean, the fact that Pali Village Cafe is still running after 13 years is testimony to the fact that she achieved her goal of converting a new space into something that looked old.
That's great. Yeah, so I guess everybody, you know, depending on what strikes you and what you're looking for.
Okay, well, I've been really given the gift of taking people to India, and many have never been here, and they herald from around the world, whether they're coming from Hong Kong or Lebanon or museum groups from the United States. And one of the things yes, we are staying at some of the wonderful hotels that India has to offer, but I really want to show them India. And so I have tried to craft mornings that we will find ourselves at Crawford Market at 5 o'clock in the morning. We will find ourselves watching the men sort the newspapers, which is extraordinary to just even see the memory that they have in stacks. I was able to take a group to the fish market, which, if you haven't done it, it's senses in itself. Then I'm also, you know, to go into the dobies and to go not up on the bridge and take the photographs, but go down into where I really say, for the grace of God go I, when I watch this, of young men sitting in bleach and trying to shower themselves off. You know, it's not a photographic moment. And so, yes, you know, where I was speaking about jewelry before, we can go to the grand houses of jewelry, but you really have to feel India and be able to see this. And I had an experience a couple weeks ago, which, of course, that wonderful movie Lunchbox made it absolutely a wonderful Harvard Business case study. But I went to the train station and I watched these lunch boxes with a group of Hong Kong clients come off, and really just looking at, you know, if one gets wrong, thousands are wrong. And, you know, I was like looking at the boxes. So that's what you really want to show India. Yes, we go down Marine Drive, and yes, we're going to the grand restaurants, and I'm not going to say we're not. But I've also had the gift of Adventures in Art, being able to go into people's homes. And there's a beautiful saying, a city becomes a world when you love someone within it. And when you're able to go into a lifestyle and be able to see how someone lives on any scale, I think that really shows you a city.
Thank you, Karen. So is there something, a particular aesthetic in that journey, whether through the lunch boxes or down in the Dhobi Ghats or in someone's home, that resonates with you the here and now?
Something that resonates. Well, I don't think there's one item, you know, it's experiences that I really have to say that brings home to me, that, you know, when you're able to go into someone's home and be able to experience lifestyle and the way that they're not going to the food emporium or Whole Foods. They're able to go to a fresh market, whether they're doing it themselves or sending individuals. There's always something that does ring home to me, and I really like it, as I guess I can say as a Westerner. I enjoy going into people's homes, and they always say, everything's home cooked. You know, there's this great pride of that statement. And I never really heard it until I've come to India, because everything's home cooked. And I've been in homes in India where, in London, where the same thing comes. So there's just little moments that I've enjoyed. So I can't say it's a thing, it's one specific.
Yeah, and I guess that also relates back to what we were just saying about the whole organic process of the ever-changing and adapting city that we are, because you could be standing on a street corner offering your guests a lovely coconut, and they could all be having coconut water at a shack, and then right beside it you will see this beautiful Art Deco building, and I think all of that juxtaposed is very interesting for people who visit. And I think Bombay is a very accepting city that way, you know. Thank you both. I would like to get into collaborations and talk a bit with our design practitioners about, you know, who's helped them revive a certain piece of heritage while looking towards the future. And I wanted to ask for those to kick this one off, and talk about a little bit about your journey with Bombay Canteen. I think many of you here may have been to Bombay Canteen, and the interior architect Ayaz Basraj.
So, you know, at first glance, when you meet Ayaz, he's a very intense gentleman with a large, bushy beard, and he seems to be perennially laughing at the world, you know, smirking at the world almost, like he knows something that other people don't. And so when he came to us for Bombay Canteen, I honestly did not know what this project was all about. I thought it was just another restaurant that he was doing, and by then we were doing a lot of them. And I remember him coming and saying that, you know, I thought he'd come up with something really funky and cool and hip and this. No, bro, I want your most traditional tiles. So I was like, I was trying my hardest to dissuade him. I was like, no, we have some new stuff now. We have cool stuff now. No, I want the stuff that's like your oldest designs and your most, you know, sort of well-weathered, that you see in every space in Bombay kind of designs, which is really rare for a restaurant designer. Normally they come in and they're like, what's new, naya kya hai, you know? So sort of reluctantly, and then he told me the quantity it was a very small amount. So I was like, oh God, okay, fine, Ayaz ke liye bana do. So we made it and supplied it, and then a few months later I discovered that, you know, not only is Bombay Canteen designed by him, but it also has one of the world's best chefs who's created this restaurant. And the result that came out of it was really about Bombay. It was really like he was trying to bring in a lot of the aesthetics of Bombay into that space. He wasn't so concerned with trying to be novel and out there. He just wanted to give something that was familiar, and the food was like that. It was familiar stuff that you would eat, but there was a little twist to it. And that continues to be what they create, and that's, I think, what's made them into the top restaurant in India right now. So sometimes, you know, clients just surprise you with something left of field and
yeah, absolutely.
come up with something amazing.
And then, yeah, of course, the food again is so reflective in that of the amalgamation that we're talking about today, because I love all of their little twists. I think they do a really good job. But tell me a little bit about then, you know, post that you went on to collaborate with Ayaz, and he designed I think a series of tiles for Bharat Tiles.
He did. So what happened was that over the years we have been creating a lot of tiles for designers for their projects, and we wanted to be a little proactive and say that let's design our own stuff and keep it ready, so the next project that comes, you know, they'll find something ready. So as part of refreshing our catalog and making it more modern, we started working with Ayaz, and at that time he was fascinated by things that were 3D. So his whole idea was like, let's create something on the floor that looks like it's three-dimensional, but it has to be flat. And we went through a lot of iterations on the computer. We went through a lot of design mock-ups and things like that. And finally what he came up with was a bunch of stuff that either could be, that looked like origami unfolding on the floor, or that would look like it had some three-dimensional aspect, but it was flat. And those have actually become our most popular designs now, because they're used in a variety of ways which I don't think even he imagined back then.
Can you give us one or two examples of that?
So there was one design which had a certain kind of fold to it, and he had filled in the colors into that design in a certain way in the catalog. And I went to visit a site in Delhi, and I saw something that looked, I mean, outrageously different from anything I'd ever seen before. I realized it was one of Ayaz's designs, but somebody had just played with the color boxes and just changed them around slightly, and now the whole design looked 3D in a whole different way. So, I mean, it was like a testimony to the versatility of his design, that
The actual tile design.
yeah, could have been used in a few different ways. And
Okay.
I don't think he imagined that, but it just happened. Good design sometimes does that.
That's wonderful. Thank you for those. Siddharth, I'd like to talk to you a bit about this as well, just in that Siddharth has such an interesting background. He worked in ad films for a long, long time, and he designed a lot of furniture for the sets. And I think eventually he started having to just make the furniture from the sets, or repurpose furniture that he found. So through that journey, or with your journey at BARO, since you and Srila have collaborated on that project together, is there something specific that you can think of that has been really interesting as a collaboration that has led to a sort of new design journey? Or just has been interesting in the challenge of it, or the aesthetics?
I think if you take two contrasting people and throw them into one room, you'll end up with something unique. So, because I intrinsically come from a very, I'd say, okay, I wouldn't use the word sedate, but a more calming aesthetic. Whereas Srila, on the other hand, is raging mad. You know, it's just like crazy colors, and she'll use the most primary form of colors, and I'm like, oh my God, what are you thinking? Where's the gray in that? So what ended up, though, is this unique thing which neither of us actually projected. And I think that's become...
It's become your thing.
Yes.
It really has.
It has, because it's very hard to replicate.
Yes,
because
yes.
it's just
Have people in the audience been into BARO and seen what they do in there? Yes, it's very interesting. It's a very good example of here and now, marrying all the different design of the past with all the madness of today. And
Yeah, and I don't think that was ever the intention. We never set out trying to do that.
Yeah.
It just happened along the way because I come from a school of thought where no two dining chairs need to be the same. I mean, there's no rule for anything as such. And yet you find, I think each piece or each color or each fabric or any individual element has its own language, has its own gravity, and you put the right amount of gravity, you sprinkle some sort of magic dust onto it, and it does its own thing. And you don't have to try very hard beyond that. It's just recognizing different forms and seeing what oppose each other, and even opposites at times, like we know attract, but they form a confluence which ends up being a unique form, which you can't imagine to begin with.
That's funny, and it's so true, because I've known Srila for a long time. So of course, when one goes into BARO, you know what the Srila stamp is, the very bright and the vibrant. I just met Siddharth recently, and I thought to myself, gosh, now I understand how they sit side by side, because you see that. There are places you can actually go in BARO and sit down and have a calm moment and understand Siddharth's sedate. And there are, of course, many spaces you can be in BARO, which are just very sort of, you have to be ready for that, and you need your sunglasses. So now that reminds me of something, though, that's interesting. It's interesting when all of these things are mixed together, and I'm moving out of the city just for a moment to talk about the Faluknama Palace. I think the Faluknama Palace, there are parts of it on the first floor, and I may have to ask someone here in the audience to remind me of the name of that room. Is that the formal sort of seating and living room? Sorry? No, not the 101 dining room. The sitting space outside of it. The general seating area. But that, to me, is an example of absolute over-the-top design, all coming together in some sort of symmetry and calm. I don't know, they've achieved it there. They really have. So anyway, your story made me think of that. How much time do we have left? About 20 minutes, okay. I want to go into these experiences. I'm coming back to Karen now and just thinking about what she was talking about, and the whole journey through Bombay, just being an experience for the visitor. And then each place you go to, whether it's a heritage building or it's a street corner to have a Nariyal Pani or to go to the Dhobi Ghat, becomes an experience of sorts. So this question is for all of our panelists, if you had to give somebody visiting our city who loves design and aesthetics a gift, what would you give them? And who would like to start? And that gift could be a physical gift, an experience. Gaurav, should we ask you that? And then.
Yeah. So, to me again, to give a slightly different take on the question, and this goes back to my experience. I first experienced Bombay independently when I was 14, on my own. I was staying with I came here to stay with a friend of my dad, and I got the opportunity to sneak out. And I had a lot of time on hand, and nobody was bothered about where I was. I took a local train. This was in Bandra. I took a local train all by myself. I came to town. I got off at Churchgate. I took a double-decker bus, sat in the front of the double-decker bus, and it was a beautiful, breezy, I think there was a little bit of rain that time. I went up and down Marine Drive 4 or 5 times. I got off, I walked towards Colaba. I didn't know where I was going, so I walked towards Colaba, and I walked on Colaba Causeway. I found Leopold. I didn't know it was an iconic space. I found Leopold. I went in, I had a beer. So, at age 14, I did it, so now I can admit it. Because nobody was asking me. So there's something about Bombay. It's vast, but it's very intimate. And I somehow managed to get to Priyadarshini Park on Nepinsi Road as well. So I did this whole thing, and I did it 14-year-old. I've grown up in small towns. I've not, so Bombay was this big city, but it was not intimidating. It was vast and yet intimate. It was It was, you know, and there is so many different things that come together in Bombay which juxtapose themselves, but they fall in place so beautifully. And you know, if I had to, if somebody was coming out of Bombay, and it was a beautiful, and I still remember each and every moment of that day, half a day, and they panicked. They eventually found I was nowhere, and that was not the day and age of cell phones, and they were panicking by the time I got back to Bandra, but and I somehow managed to. But I think there is a certain beauty in the spirit, cliched, but there is a spirit of Bombay, which is very, and I've lived all over the country, in many different cities, small towns, some cities, big cities as well. There is something very unique about just being in Bombay on the street with the normal goings on of Bombay. And if anybody comes into Bombay, I would love for them to experience it. I don't know if it can be as beautiful as it is for a 14-year-old boy who walks into Bombay for the first time and is let loose, but I still think, and I still experience it sometimes. I walk around, and it's not about the physicality of design. I think design is ultimately about, you know, the people and the way they live and the way they come together, and I think there is tremendous beauty in it. One of my favorite books is by Catherine Wu. It's called Behind the Beautiful Forever. And after I read the book, it sensitized me to even the slums. You know, there is a coherence there. There is a way that life is together, and I think Bombay is very unique in that. And I say this off experience because I've lived across the country. I've not only been in Bombay. I can tell you that it's very special, and I would love for whoever comes to Bombay in some way or the other. I don't know how it would be, you know, now, but I would find that experience and somehow give that experience to whoever comes into Bombay, and that would be lovely, I think.
So you're giving them a long walk and a forgotten bus journey.
I would just let them be.
You would let them be.
And that's what Bombay,
wander.
That's what Bombay does to you. It lets you be, and it doesn't let you be in a sense that it just forgets about you, but it lets you be. And I don't know. I don't know whether I'm able to articulate and explain this,
no.
But it's a very beautiful experience, and I would love for people who come to Bombay to have it.
Siddharth, would you like to?
So, two things. So the whole, I mean, the seed of this conversation also revolves around heritage and the past. And I think the revival of it has come about where a lot of us realize that I think we've taken a wrong turn somewhere and gone back to what people were doing correctly, were doing better. And I think the hallmark for a lot of that is patience. And the patience people took to do what they did, create what they created, to see what they saw, was what ended up in all the beauty that was. I mean, I'm not saying that's not created anymore, but that patience was, I think, the bottom line of that.
The essence of it.
The essence of it.
Absolutely.
And that patience, if you were to bring into a city like Bombay, it's almost like being in a Zen-like position and watching the world go crazy around you. And you'd observe it very differently. You'd see it very differently because you would be able to see from a standstill point instead of being swept with the flow of the city. And that's a unique perspective. And the second thing I would, gift is, I think, 17 extra vertebrae on the neck.
This one I love.
Because at eye level, Bombay, I have to admit, is ugly. It is a pitiful state the city is in because it's just ghastly to look at. But if you look above the first floor, I'm just, above the eye level, it is stunning. It's gorgeous. You've got all these magnificent buildings, facades ranging back from, all, eras of big movements of architecture right to the modern ones. And it's goddamn stunning. We miss it because we just engulfed at eye level. I think those extra vertebrae would be a huge, I definitely want those.
Thank you. Before we get on to, so basically the combination here would be to have, the half a day to wander with the really long giraffe-like neck and have a lot of patience. Those are the gifts. Karen?
Oh, thanks. If I can use one more quote, and I think it really, for me, being so proud to be able to show the world Bombay, but there's a wonderful saying, Chinese proverb, it's better to walk 10,000 steps than to read 10,000 scrolls. And I think you have to walk Bombay to understand it. You have to be here. And how do you find yourself, me back in New York City, or I'm going to be giving a speech in Palm Beach on the Maharaja of Jewels. How do you able to translate what Bombay is if you're not here? So if I was to give a physical gift, so I would love to give the gift to many, to be able to walk the streets of Bombay, but that's not possible for many. For me, after a 15 to 18-hour flight, depending on, there's nothing like coming off the plane and you're on the bridgeway and you smell Bombay. But I'm only saying in a very positive way that you smell the saffron, you smell these wonderful spices that, fill the air. So if I was to bottle the genie, I think, and if it was a physical gift, and I was to be bringing something back to a gift to the Western world, I'd be bringing a box of spices, incense, to try to get to the senses.
Well, that's lovely, and to bottle that smell. I'm just going to...
And I meant only in a positive, please.
Yes, but I just have to say one thing before we go on to those, and this reminds me of a story. We had a very dear family living here for 5 years, and their children were very, very small. And they came as 3 and 5-year-olds and left as 8 and 10-year-olds. And James, when he was in college, wrote a short piece about Bombay, basically capturing what Karen has just said about longing to land, and as the flight descends, and just as you hover over the city, you know you are home, and the comfort in knowing that. Firdaus?
So if I was to give a gift, it would be the gift of a tetrapod. Because actually the tetrapod is concrete, so obviously I love it. But apart from that, it also symbolizes everything that Bombay is. It's basically a fight against the elements, against nature, and making something. I mean, Marine Drive would have been washed away long ago if it weren't for those tetrapods. And I read somewhere that Bombay is one of the only places on earth that was created out of nothing. It was a wasteland. It was disconnected islands. It was full of malaria and disease. And what generations of Bombayites have done is to basically make it into the city. And one of the things that has done that, I think, is the tetrapod. So I would give that to everyone as a symbol of who we are.
Thank you for those. Thank you all for your very thoughtful responses. I want to end marking Mahatma Gandhi's 150th year. We're just going to go back to Khadi for a moment before we open it up to questions. And I'd like to chat a little bit with you about that, Gaurav, and bring anyone else who has thoughts on Khadi into it. So we're talking about the here and now, and we've gone through an entire design journey, or not, from the Swadeshi movement through mid to modern century design, and here and now, and we're just thinking about how Gandhi would feel about the emergence of Khadi, and how would he redefine what Khadi means technically. So just for all of you who are not deeply into textiles, Khadi, in the actual definition of Khadi, is that it is hand-spun cotton and it is hand-woven. So we had a brief chat about this the other day, and I'm interested to hear thoughts from our panelists on how he'd feel now and how would he define it.
Yeah. So, I think the Mahatma was a brilliant man. Many reasons, of course, but I think he had tremendous common sense, and he had a pulse of the masses, and that was his unique gift. Of course, he had the ability to then energize the masses, but he knew he could get down to the basics, and he knew exactly what would move the needle. And I think what mattered to him, and I go back to the point that we made earlier, I think it was not about the definitions. It is not so much about, and that's why I say Khadi is not a product, it's a movement, it's an idea. It's not so much about whether it's cotton, and we debated whether it's cotton, one school of thought is it's also wool, and it's also silk, There is another group which gets very militant if, it is partly not hand spun. But I think the underlying purpose was, again, economic self-reliance. It was a means of creating dignity at the smallest level in society. And then that feeding back to creating this wave of, what he called moral regeneration. And I think it's amazing that while India was under colonial rule at that time, and therefore there was a reason and there was a trigger and there was a cause for that kind of energizing and that kind of movement to be created, even today, everything that he did, and we are an independent country, and still there is a lot of regression, there is backwardness, there is poverty. We've been talking about Khadi, you were talking about this weaver, and I've had a similar experience. One of the last surviving weavers of a particular kind of extra weft weaving is a 70-year-old man, I think, and he lives in Jamal Hata in Bihar. And the man works, all the men in the village have left. They've gone to the Gulf or they've gone to the cities. This man just, persists and perseveres with his craft. And he does not have a window in his room. And he does not have a window because if he makes a window, he can't afford to put a door. And if he does not put a door, then, it gets cold over there. And he's almost like a national treasure. He's one of the few last surviving persons of a particular kind of craft. So we are again at that stage. There is extreme and abject poverty. There is neglect, and neglect is a form of disrespect of our heritage and our tradition. And I think the Mahatma would have found whatever is a modern way of whipping that energy back, bringing that magic back. I'll give you one more story, if you allow me, and if there is time, of another gentleman. I didn't meet him. I met him later, but I heard his story. He's somebody who's been teaching spinning Khadi for the last 55 years, and he goes from village to village to teach women in their house so that they can generate employment from while sitting in the house. And there was this lady with an NGO who's based out of Patna, and she wanted to use his services. And she called him and said that his name is Ram Vilas Mahato. And she said, Ram Vilas ji, will you... this is what we want to do. We want to bring back employment. We want to work with Khadi, and will you work with us? So he says, I'll be very happy to work with you. And then they very tentatively asked him, so what do we need to do for you, in terms of remuneration? And he held the lady's hand and said, मुझे कुछ नहीं चाहिए. आपने मेरे गांधी को जिंदा कर दिया. You've brought my Gandhi alive. And again, Gandhi is not that person. Gandhi is that idea. He could be that epicenter of that, tremendous awakening. And I think if he were there today, coming back to your question, sorry, I've gone round and round. These experiences have been quite overwhelming. But if he were here today, he would go back, but he would use a modern. He would not get caught by definitions. He would not bother whether it is handspun and handwoven. He would worry about the fact that is it bringing dignity and self-reliance to that last common denominator in the value chain.
Oh, absolutely. And I think he would be very fluid in adapting.
Very practical.
And very
One of the most practical people in history, I think.
Absolutely. Siddharth or Karen, Firdaus, anyone just want to share a thought on Khadi before we wrap up for the evening? Or yeah.
A little anecdote that I was in a village some years ago, and we were just reminiscing with an old man, and he was rueful of the current state of affairs. And the biggest point he made was that when, say, he was hitting 90, I think, and he was very lucid. And he said, back in the day when we needed something, we did it ourselves. If the village needed a road, we did something called a shramdan, where you collect labor and you collect a resource and you build the damn road. You don't wait for anyone to do it. You create your own work, and that is exactly what Gandhi was talking about. And that's the essence we need. We're just relying on the other person to do it for us. I think it would change a lot of things if people thought more like that.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you. We're going to open it up for questions. Yes.
Since the topic is
Asad?
heritage and the city, one of the few newer examples none of you touched upon, which I'm biased to, is the Royal Opera House, which is a remarkable
Of course.
thing for this city.
Yes.
But thinking about heritage, and all of us in our journey, we've started appreciating heritage at a later stage in our life. We didn't grow up saying, "Oh, I love these old Minton tiles." Now I look at the Minton tiles and I say, "I love it." Previously, we would have said, "What is this?" So, what are we doing to build these future stakeholders as champions of our heritage? Because what are we doing for anyone could answer that question? Because that needs to be done at this stage. We need to start appreciating it. We'll be back to square one 2 years later.
It's interesting. I'll give you another anecdote. When we started working on this Khadi project, one of the things we did a small dipstick survey of about 110, 120 people. They were all on the right side of 30 or wrong side of 30. They were younger than 30. And we had 4 questions. So I'm just giving you an example of how generations lose touch. So there were 4 questions, and it was slightly doctored to, get a particular response. But the 4 questions was, one was, what is the value of a Bitcoin? Second was, who sent a car into outer space? Third was, what is #MeToo? The 4th question was, what is ikat? And the first 3 questions got 80% plus right answers. Ikat got less than 12%, 15% was the response. Interestingly, because it was multiple choice, the answer which got the maximum response was that it's a new app by Apple. Because people hear it as iCat. And again, very telling, because, and you can argue Ikat is Indian, Indonesian, whatever, but point is that it's part of our culture, it's part of our heritage, and a whole generation has completely lost touch with it, has no sense of what this is. And I think it's therefore important. But there are 2-3 points that I want to make. It's important to bring it back into their consciousness, but you cannot force it. Education, yes, but you have to bring relevance. You try to say that, no, this is ikat and you must love ikat and you have to, take ikat and live with it. It'll not happen. You have to bring ikat back into the life of a 25-year-old in the way that a 25-year-old would understand it and accept it and absorb it. And that is, again, going back to Siddharth's point, that we have a history of always bringing things, adapting them and making something beautiful, which is relevant and current and here and now, as you say. And I think there needs to be a lot of effort on that. You can't be sort of stuck on and rigid and say, oh, that is the old design and that's what I'm going to stick with and I'm going to force you to eat it. No, you have to treat the dish to the taste of the modern audience, and I think that is your best bet in reviving, sustaining heritage. And some of the work that we are trying to do is along those lines. So, we're not getting caught up in the definitions, but we're saying, how will a 25-year-old love this shirt? A 25-year-old wants to wear a very nice shirt. He's interested in the idea of Khadi, but, he won't wear a Khaddar ka kurta just because there is a beautiful idea called Khadi. You have to figure out how to make Khadi relevant, how to make it scalable, make a washable garment out of it, and be able to make designs out of it that he's going to love, and then he's going to be happy about Khadi. And I think that's one of the thoughts that I had.
I'll round out, Gaurav, and the textile thread that we're on right now in terms of the design and aesthetics in the cities, but I want to just pay a tribute to Martin Singh for a moment, to Mapu, because he was amazing in having a weaver center in every single city. Every single major city and some of the mid-tier cities had these amazing weaver centers as reference points. So students who were curious had a point, a place and point to go to connect, to learn about weaving and learn about ikat and all the different techniques. So curiosity is important, and also reviving the institutions. And we were talking about education earlier. That becomes very important as far as textiles is concerned. I think as far as architecture is concerned, we have some amazing architects who give a lot of time in this city. How do we feel about the revival of just jewelry, tiles? We've got for those who's...
So one of the things that I feel a great regret about is that a lot of the most beautiful products that India produces are never seen by Indians. And of late, I also have been going to see some of the handicraft centers and places where handmade things are produced, and They're stunning. They're out of this world. But you'll never see them in India. They're all exported. We actually have a great wealth of designs, of contemporary designs, which have, survived and become very relevant. But they're just not for India. I mean, Indians don't want to sell it to Indians. They're like, appreciate kaun karega?
The narrative has to change, I feel, because for the average person, and I mean we all part of the average people, we have a sense of aesthetic which I feel is largely borrowed. We call it our own beyond a while where we've borrowed so much that we say, okay, we don't want this, we don't want that, we'll keep this and make our own. And you form a narrative of who you are and what you like and what you don't like. The general narrative today is not ours. It's completely being fed to people, and it's being fed in a manner which is entirely homogeneous. It's just a singular fashion trends. That's an example of narratives. If narratives can change and individuals can form. I remember from my own childhood, and I'm not that old, that we had people who were unique individuals. They dressed differently. They were. We knew, okay, so and so uncle will always be, with a pipe or with a certain kind of a shirt, or now it's all the same, and that bludgeoning of an aesthetic has to stop somewhere. And I don't know how to go about it, but just, open our own minds to what we like.
Absolutely. And when Siddharth talks about this, even, the individual, it might have been higgledy-piggledy, as the British would say, but even everyone's interiors were distinctly different. And now it's all about that sort of, homogeneous, all of it sort of monochromatic or whatever it might be. But the interior design story is also becoming much the same, because it's so much about everybody wanting to keep up with the Joneses or the Patels or whoever that might be.
Well, I think we have to look also the importance of Indian architecture outside of India that is being brought back. I had the great fortune of working at one point in my career, and I hope I pronounce his name right. It's Raul Malhotra. And Raul is the chairperson of Harvard's architecture school, graduate school. And Raul keeps an office in Bombay and Cambridge, so he commutes back and forth. And you look at, he went to Campion, I think University of Michigan, and now is in Cambridge. And he's spearheading America's leaders of architecture, yet coming back and forth to Bombay. And I know he's worked with, building elephant huts. I know he's worked certainly on private projects. But we really have to look at the importance of the genius that your country brings outside to other countries and bringing it back here architecturally.
Thank you, Karen. Other questions?
I don't need it. I'm quite loud. I was just wondering that, how does the panel feel? Because I was hoping that would be brought up about the most exciting revival of heritage that's happening right under our nose, which is the Kalapura district, and especially the synagogue. So I was actually waiting for someone to touch upon that and to hear that's really exciting for the city, especially this part of the city.
Good, and very important question for now, Preeti. Thank you. For those, would you like to address that first? For those, Bharat Tiles has a very special role in the synagogue, so maybe you'd like to touch upon it first.
So, totally bragging, but...
Please do. We all want to know what's behind this art that's about to reveal itself.
So it was really strange because I had a designer friend of mine from England visiting 2 or 3 years back, and she said, let's go and see the synagogue. And there was this policeman standing outside, and I said, forget it, the cops won't let us go in and all. So she said, no. She went and spoke to the policeman. He said, yeah, you can go inside. Just if you're going to take pictures, you have to pay 100 rupees and you can go and see it. So we went inside and saw it. It was like stunning. They had these amazing Minton tiles and gorgeous interiors. And it was actually quite a small space. I mean, it was a very small space, but very strikingly done. And then when we heard that was being redone, the architects got in touch with us and asked us to replicate the Minton tiles. And so the Minton tiles are actually like really, really small pieces of ceramic which are stuck together. Like one square foot may have like 100 pieces of small tiles stuck together to form a pattern. So as usual, these kind of projects have no budget. It's somebody paying money to get it done. I think you might know that about the Opera House, and they came to us and said that, will you do it in this budget? We don't have a lot of money. This is the budget. So we actually undertook it as a passion project because we knew that A, obviously there's a bunch of fame attached to it, and B, because it's such a challenge to make so many small elements and make that floor again. So we've actually restored that floor, and now it's something which hopefully will be seen once the synagogue reopens. I don't know. I think another year or so, because it's going slowly.
Because it looks like it's almost
Absolutely.
But knowing from experience with restoration projects, there's always a lot of tiny little elements which have to be gotten exactly perfectly right. So I don't know. How long did the Opera House take to? 7 years. 7. Yeah, right. So let's hope not that long, but soon, I think. Yep.
I'd like to add a couple of things to that, Preeti, and just address your question because it's an important one. Kalagoda being such an exciting place right now. I really do miss Rhythm House, so I will put that out there. And, one hopes that whoever does purchase that space finds a way to hold on to that interior and do something really interesting, which is a bit of a celebration to Rhythm House. But it's exciting to see what's coming up around Kalagoda, all the stores, the cafes, so many little interesting spots. What I'd love to see is government initiative. I love that so many private people have been involved in filling these spaces and finding these interesting things to do. But what the government needs to do is recognize it as a complete walking area and stop traffic in that T-zone altogether. And that's what I'd like to see as far as an initiative goes.
Not a plug, but our first Khadi store is also opening in Kalagoda in about a week's time.
Yes, in about a week. We're all waiting for our invitations, Gaurav. Anyone else on Kalagoda?
So this was one of the proposals that I'd heard of earlier, that making it to a walking zone, but I think probably will be impossible to do. I don't know. There seems to be no will.
And I think it's such an easy area to actually make a walking zone. It's not a lot of space we're talking about, road space. One more question from the audience?
last question.
This is for Gautam as well as Siddharth. Siddharth, you mentioned about Swadeshi is not crowded, but it's a movement. True to his word. You also mentioned about the poverty of a weaver. I come from with the background of weavers community in Karnataka, but today in Andhra Pradesh, weavers are committing suicide. Last October, 150 days, a year of Mahatma Gandhi, I also associated with the Indian Merchant Chamber for 40 years. We called about 20 weavers from Andhra Pradesh and presented them money collected from corporates, because they have about 70,000 odd members. Almost 2,000 people came forward and contributed to buy a charka for all these weavers, so that self-generating income can start. So is this initiative wonderful, or is there anything which we further can do for enhancing the income generation among this thing, as well as keep Swadeshi movement much in a vigorous thing? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. It is a very unfortunate fact that there are weavers committing suicide. Just in the Andhra region, it used to be almost double-digit figures every year, and it's coming down, but not enough. My response to your question is yes, giving charkas is a starting point, but it needs much more than that. My view is that, and basis interactions with some weavers, and because my team is doing a lot of interactions, I think what the weaver wants is very simple. The weaver wants regular work. There is often this utopian idea of, oh, we must pay them phenomenally, we must split the wealth. Let's face it, it's going to be a value chain, and the weaver is going to create the product, and somebody has to buy it, and there has to be a payment. That payment has to pay for all the value chain, logistics and retail, etc., and there should be enough money left. And the weavers are not particularly greedy in saying that, oh, give us a lot of money, for the skill. But so we have, and I will give you a sense of what we are trying to do. We have a 6-point charter. We call it the 6 spokes of the spinning wheel. And there are 5 points of intervention which lead you to the 6th point, which is really very critical end result. The first is design. You need design intervention. Just the fact that it's craft and there's a weaver doing it by hand is not enough, as I said. Nobody, the people of today are not going to wear a khadar ka kurta. It has to have the element of design which makes it relevant and compelling for modern audiences. Design. Second is quality and technology. There is, for all its greatness, it needs some technological intervention for it to become garmentable, scalable, and therefore usable in today's day and age. So that's the second point of intervention. And it needs business houses who participate and provide ways and means. It needs, and it's amazing. On that point, I'll give you an example. We have a young girl who's trained in weaving. I didn't know earlier that there was a school which trains in weaving in Jaipur or around Jaipur. And she is all of 26. She's been working in the clusters. And just this young girl with her brain, and we get these fabrics which are not able to make, let's say, a shirt out of because it's very limp or it washes and shrinks. But this young girl has been able to work and figure out with the weavers, she can speak the language, but she's managed to figure out how to make it compact. We wanted to make some bags out of Khadi fabric, and we realized the fabric had to be reinforced too much. She's worked with them to figure out how to put leather strips into the fabric and therefore make a bag with it. So there is a technology intervention. Third is a production management working capital. Because that is something all weavers are very weak at, and most artisans are. But somebody needs to really work out how the money is deployed into production, how much yarn you buy, how much sliver, how much yarn, how much, how you manage the money, and it needs to be controlled and supported. The fourth area is distribution. Eventually, you have to figure out how to get it to the consumers. And the fifth is marketing, which is the point on education. Because eventually, all this will create a product which is not necessarily cheap, and only if there is an understanding and empathy for artisanal product will there be consumption, and that will only happen if there is investment behind it. So these 5 points of intervention lead you to the 6th, which is actually when you do all these 5 properly, you make money out of it, you invest a part of that money back into the artisan community and the upgrade and the uplift of the artisan community. So it's complex, and it cannot be charity. Anybody who thinks that you can do CSR or charity, it is unsustainable. There are also weavers who are very sore about the fact that there is, let's say, a big project, and then there is somebody who's come with a commission to do XYZ products, and then you do a lot of weaving, you get some very good rates, and then everybody disappears, and then you're sitting there wondering, now what do I do? I don't have any orders. So somebody has to build this continuous virtuous cycle, and I think the onus is partly on government, and you'll be amazed I'm amazed the number of schemes and the amount of funds that are actually available.
Gaurav,
which are languishing.
Thank you so much. And all of those points are so important. If the two of you can have that conversation later, but we have to wrap up this evening. Thank you.
Thank you to our wonderful panelists. It was an amazing and absorbing discussion. This series is something that I hold very dear to me, and this topic especially. The next one in the series is Sea and the City, so your tetrapods will come into that, is on the 21st of February. Thank you, audience, for being here, and especially being here on time. At Avid, we have many programs coming up, including a few sessions at the Jaipur Literature Festival later this week. Please pick up some information at the door. We'd like to thank our partners, the NGMA Mumbai, Ministry of Culture, Government of India, Dr. Rupa Vataram and her team for giving us this opportunity, and have a wonderful evening. Good night.